The heavy oak doors of Clarence's house closed with a sound that was more felt than heard. Inside, the world was one of priceless art, hushed voices, and a history that pressed down on the shoulders of everyone who walked the corridors. Outside, on the pavement behind the security barriers, a different world existed. A world of tourists with smartphones, of well-wishers clutching flags, and of those like the man standing quietly to one side who saw everything. The man was a veteran guard, a member of the Royal Protection Command who had spent the better part of 2 decades as a silent sentinel in the shadows of the monarchy. His face, usually set in an expression of professional neutrality, was weathered and thoughtful. To the crowds, he was just another part of the furniture, a faceless part of the royal machine. But his eyes, a pale and piercing blue, missed nothing. They had seen the genuine tears and the practiced smiles, the private kindnesses and the public coldness. He had stood guard as princesses came and went, as marriages crumbled, and as a young girl grew up under the glare of 1,000,000 flashbulbs. He had watched Princess Charlotte, the young daughter of the Prince and Princess of Wales, navigate this strange gilded cage from the time she was a toddler, clutching her mother's hand and scowling at the cameras with a ferocity that belied her age. He had watched her blossom into a young woman, learning the intricate dance of royal duty. And he had watched, with a growing sense of unease, the subtle machinations of Queen Camilla, the woman who had waited decades to claim the ultimate prize. For years, the official narrative had been one of unity and stability. The firm, as the royal family called itself, was a rock. But the guard knew the truth. He knew the truth was a tangled web of whispered conversations in drafty hallways, of letters that were never meant to be seen, and of a plot so audacious it threatened to undermine the very future of the crown. And now, with Princess Charlotte finally ready to speak her own truth, the guard felt a weight lift from his conscience. It was time for the world to know what really happened behind the palace walls. The story he carried began not with a bang, but with a whisper. It began on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, a few years after the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, a time when the monarchy was still finding its feet under the new reign. And the guard had been assigned to a private wing of Kensington Palace, a space usually reserved for family and the most trusted of aides. He was standing at the end of a long corridor, his presence almost invisible, when he saw Princess Charlotte, then a teenager with a sharp intelligence in her eyes, walking with her grandmother, the then queen consort Camilla. Their body language was a story in itself. Charlotte walked with a rigid posture, her hands clasped firmly in front of her, a classic defensive stance. Camilla, on the other hand, moved with a fluid ease, her hand gently placed on Charlotte's back, guiding her. To any onlooker, it would have appeared a tender moment, a step-grandmother mentoring a young royal. But the guard saw Charlotte's subtle flinch at Camilla's touch. He saw the way her jaw tightened as Camilla leaned in to speak. He couldn't hear the words, but he could feel the tension. It was a static electricity in the air. Later that evening, he found the princess in one of the less formal gardens, a place she often came to escape. She was sitting on a stone bench, staring at a letter in her hands. Her shoulders were shaking. The guard, following protocol, quietly repositioned himself to ensure her privacy, but not before he saw her wipe a tear from her cheek. This was not the behavior of a happy, supported young woman. This was the look of someone carrying a burden. It was weeks later that the first piece of the puzzle fell into place. A frantic call came through from a junior aide at Clarence's house. A private correspondence had been misplaced, and it was a matter of utmost urgency to find it before it fell into the wrong hands. The guard was part of the discreet search team. The letter was eventually found, having slipped behind a desk in a rarely used library. It wasn't in an envelope, so the guard's eyes inadvertently scanned a few lines before he could look away. It was a letter from a senior palace aide to a tabloid editor. The language was veiled, but the meaning was unmistakable. It contained a suggestion for a story that would subtly undermine the public image of Catherine, the Princess of Wales, portraying her as overly ambitious and difficult to work with. The timing coincided perfectly with a week where Catherine had been scheduled to announce a major new charitable initiative. The initiative was subsequently overshadowed by the negative press, and the guard felt a chill run down his spine. He returned the letter to its place, and the crisis was averted, but the seed of doubt was planted. He began to watch more closely. He noticed which aides were always hovering near Camilla and which ones were kept at a distance from the Wales family. He noticed how information seemed to flow in one direction only, from the inner workings of the Wales household to the ears of the Queen's private staff. The whispers became harder to ignore. He heard a conversation between two senior members of Camilla's staff discussing a strategy to ensure that Charlotte's upcoming public speech at a youth charity event was appropriate. The word was laced with a sneer. They spoke of guiding the young princess to focus less on her own ideas and more on the established narrative of the family's unity. The real plan, as the guard pieced it together, was far more sinister. It was to subtly and systematically dismantle the influence of the Prince and Princess of Wales, to chip away at their popularity by associating them with difficult stories, all while positioning Camilla and her own children from a previous marriage as the true, stable heart of the monarchy. The plan, as it pertained to Charlotte, was even more specific. They saw her as a threat. She was bright, popular, and fiercely loyal to her mother. In her, they saw a future leader who would not be easily controlled. The whispers suggested a desire to have Charlotte, once she came of age, assigned to a mentor from the Queen's inner circle. This mentor would ostensibly guide her in her royal duties, but would, in reality, act as a conduit for information and a means of subtly shaping her opinions. They wanted to isolate her from her mother's influence, to drive a wedge between them by creating a narrative that Catherine was holding her daughter back, that she was too protective and not trusting enough of the institution. The plot thickened when the guard overheard a conversation about a specific letter. It was alleged that Camilla had written to Charlotte directly, bypassing her parents, offering her a special role within her own household once she turned 18. The letter, the whispers claimed, was full of flattery and promises of greater freedom and responsibility, framing it as an opportunity to step out of her mother's shadow and serve the monarch directly. Charlotte, wise beyond her years, had not responded. Instead, she had shown the letter to her father. The result was a tense, private meeting between the Prince of Wales and his stepmother. Officially, the meeting was about a charity gala. Unofficially, the guard learned from a footman who had served tea during the meeting that the atmosphere had been frosty enough to freeze the Thames. The young princess became the guard's silent focus. He watched her navigate this treacherous landscape with a growing admiration. She was polite, always, but reserved with Camilla's camp. She stuck close to her mother at public events, their bond a visible shield. He saw her in quiet moments, leaning into her father for support, her face a mask of concentration as he spoke to her in low, serious tones. They were preparing her, protecting her, but they were also, the guard realized, letting her make her own choices. They were trusting her instincts. The breaking point, the moment that led to Princess Charlotte finally deciding to speak, came in the form of a leaked story. A reputable newspaper published an article detailing tensions between the Princess of Wales and her daughter. It suggested that Charlotte was rebelling against Catherine's strict rules and that she felt more understood by her step-grandmother, the Queen. The story was a tissue of lies, but it was planted with devastating precision. The guard knew it was a lie because he had been on duty the night before the story broke. He had seen Charlotte and her mother in the gardens of Anmer Hall, their country home, laughing as they tried to bake a cake together, getting flour all over their clothes, a picture of unguarded, genuine affection. And there was no tension. There was only love. It was the leak of this fabricated story that finally pushed Charlotte to act. The guard was present, again a silent fixture in the corner of a private sitting room at Kensington Palace, when the family gathered to discuss it. The air was thick with anger and hurt. William, his face pale with rage, paced by the window. Catherine sat perfectly still, her hands in her lap, her expression one of weary resignation. And Charlotte, no longer a child, stood in the center of the room. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and strong, cutting through the tension like a bell. "No more," she said. "I will not let them use me to hurt my mother. I will not be a pawn in her game. I have seen the letters. I have heard the whispers. I know what she is trying to do. I am going to speak, and I'm going to tell the truth." The guard felt a jolt of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The princess's declaration was not a rash outburst. It was a statement of intent, delivered with a resolve that reminded him of the late queen. She was done with silence. The next day, she requested a meeting with the king. It was a private meeting, father and daughter. But the guard was stationed outside the door. He couldn't hear everything, but he heard enough. He heard Charlotte's voice, firm and unwavering, laying out the facts as she knew them. He heard the king's low, rumbling responses, sounds of concern, of surprise, and finally, of a weary, saddened acceptance. He was hearing the truth about his wife from the mouth of his daughter. The aftermath was swift, and for those in the know, shocking. That the palace announced a restructuring of the queen's household. Several long-serving aides departed abruptly, citing personal reasons. The mentorship plan for Charlotte was quietly shelved. There was no public acknowledgement of a plot, no dramatic confrontation, but the tectonic plates of the monarchy had shifted. The guard watched as Charlotte emerged, not as a victim, but as a victor. She carried herself with a new confidence, a quiet authority. She was no longer just a princess. She was a force to be reckoned with. And now, years later, as the guard stands in the shadows watching a grown woman, Princess Charlotte, address a global audience at a state banquet, he feels a sense of profound satisfaction. He watches her smile, genuine and warm, and he sees her glance toward her mother, Catherine, now the queen, who sits at the high table, her eyes shining with pride. The bond between them is unbreakable, forged in the fires of adversity. The guard knows that the story of Camilla's plot will likely never be fully and officially told. It will remain a matter of whispered conjecture, of knowing glances between palace insiders. But for him, the truth is enough. He was a witness. He saw a young woman threatened by a powerful force, and he saw her stand her ground and fight for her family, for her mother, and for her own future. He saw the quiet courage that saved a princess and, perhaps, the monarchy itself. And as the applause fades and the evening draws to a close, he allows himself a small, almost imperceptible nod of approval. The princess had finally spoken, and her voice had changed everything.